The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The palace had survived scandals, betrayals, interviews, exits, and accusations before, but this was different. This time, the wound carried a child's name. When Meghan learned that Archie's royal styling had been formally stripped from internal palace protocol, she did not stay silent. She turned her fury toward William, and within minutes, Charles was no longer the calm monarch holding the room together. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan stood frozen with the note in her hand, and the silence felt insulting. Archie's royal styling, in simple terms, meant the way his princely status was recognized inside palace records, ceremony plans, and family documents. Internal palace protocol meant the private rules the household used to decide whose names appeared in formal royal planning. The message said Archie's princely styling had been removed from active use, and Meghan understood the consequence instantly. This was not a headline. To her, this was a child pushed farther from a family already distant. William remained still when Meghan entered the corridor outside the family meeting room. The prince did not raise his voice, and that control only sharpened her anger. Meghan looked at him as though every unanswered letter, every cold briefing, every careful palace phrase had finally taken human form. She accused him of allowing Archie to be erased, not from blood, but from recognition. William's face tightened, yet he did not deny that the future monarchy needed clearer lines. The future king believed the crown could not survive if every wound became a constitutional demand. Charles received confirmation moments later, and his hand trembled before he placed the note on the table. The king had been told the change was administrative, a controlled adjustment meant to protect the monarchy's shape. Now he saw what those words had hidden. Administrative meant a mother's shock. Controlled meant a child's name missing from royal planning. Protection meant William standing silent while Meghan's pain filled the corridor. Charles felt the full weight of being father, monarch, and grandfather at once, and each role pulled him in a different direction. Meghan's voice rose with the force of someone who believed the palace had crossed a line it could never uncross. William held his ground, but his silence wounded her more than any argument could have done. Charles heard Archie's name break through the closed door. The monarch pushed it open and found William standing rigid, while Meghan faced him with tears behind her anger. But before the palace could understand why Meghan exploded, it had to face the people trapped inside the decision. Behind the palace walls, this was not just about a title. It was about blood, memory, pride, and the invisible line between family and institution. Meghan saw Archie as a son being pushed away. William saw the crown as something that had to be protected. Charles saw both sides collapsing in front of him. And in that room, no one could pretend it was only paperwork. Meghan felt the pain before anyone tried to explain it away. To her, Archie's title issue was not a cold palace matter. A royal title, in plain words, is the formal style that shows someone's recognized place inside the royal family. And for a child, it becomes more than language. It becomes belonging. Meghan believed the change carried the message she had feared for years, that her son could be loved privately, but reduced publicly. She had watched doors close before, but this door carried Archie's name on it, and that made the wound deeper. William saw the same decision through a different fire. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution, and not just the person wearing it, had to be protected from confusion, pressure, and endless emotional exceptions. The prince believed a smaller royal future needed strict rules, because every unclear title could become a future crisis. Yet his calmness made Meghan feel dismissed. His restraint looked like coldness. His silence sounded like agreement. And the more William tried to stand still, the more Meghan believed he had already chosen the system over Archie. Charles watched them both and felt the room closing around him. The king understood Meghan's fury because Archie was not an idea to her, he was her child. But he also understood William's fear because the future king was preparing for a reign where every public role would be questioned. Charles had spent his life waiting for the throne, yet in that moment, the throne offered him no comfort. It demanded judgment. It demanded distance. It demanded that he act like a monarch when his family needed a grandfather. Harry's absence made the silence even sharper. Meghan stood there without him, carrying the anger, the grief, and the defense of their son alone. She later told a senior aide in a private conversation that if the palace could strip Archie symbolically, it could strip him from memory next. The aide did not answer quickly. That pause told Meghan more than any denial could have done. Because hesitation inside the palace often meant the truth had already been discussed elsewhere. William quietly told Charles that reversing the decision would weaken every future royal boundary. The prince did not say it with triumph. He said it like a man choosing steel over softness, because he believed softness would break the crown. Charles listened, but his face changed when the private secretary entered with a sealed folder. The king reached for it slowly, and Meghan saw at once that this decision had not begun that night. And inside that folder was the hidden backstory everyone had tried to bury. Every royal crisis has a moment people later point to and say, that was when it changed. For this family, it was not a television interview, not a public statement, and not a balcony absence. It was a private rehearsal before a Windsor Thanksgiving service, when Archie's name was quietly removed from a ceremonial family order, and Meghan saw the future being rewritten before her eyes. Meghan entered that rehearsal expecting cold manners, not a quiet cut. A Windsor Thanksgiving service meant a formal family gathering at Windsor, where prayers, seating, and names carried deep symbolic meaning. A ceremonial family order, in plain words, was the written plan showing who appeared, where they stood, and how the family was recognized during the event. Archie's name had been there in an earlier draft. Then it was gone. Meghan noticed the empty space before anyone spoke, and that silence made the removal feel deliberate. William had approved a narrower royal protocol for future ceremonies, believing the monarchy could not keep blurring the line between working and non-working royals. Royal protocol simply meant the household rules that shaped who appeared in official events and how they were named. The prince saw the change as order. Meghan saw it as humiliation. To William, the future needed clean boundaries. To her, those boundaries had suddenly reached her son, and the quiet way it happened made the pain sharper than any public insult. Charles had been told it was a minor administrative correction, nothing more. The king expected a small adjustment, the kind of palace change that passed through private offices without emotion. But his face changed when he learned Meghan had seen the revised placement card herself. A placement card was not just a name marker in that room. It was proof of position. It told a person where they belonged. And when Archie's name disappeared, Meghan felt the family had shown her exactly where they believed he did not. A senior courtier later warned William during a documented private briefing that the title issue would return with force if it was not addressed openly. The prince listened, but he did not soften. He believed explanation would create more pressure, and pressure would make the crown look uncertain. The courtier understood the danger. William understood the politics. But neither answer reached Meghan, who had already carried the image of that empty space back into every conversation that followed. Harry sent a private message asking whether Archie's place was being diminished. The palace never gave him a direct answer. That unanswered message became a bruise Meghan could not ignore, because silence from the institution felt like confirmation from the family. By the time Meghan finally faced William, she was not reacting to one decision, but to every silence that came before it. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a door closing. Meghan stood across from William in a private palace room with no cameras, no public smiles, and no ceremonial distance between them. Her voice was low at first, but every word carried months of pressure. William did not step back, and that refusal only made the moment more dangerous. Meghan looked at him and asked the question no aide had dared to ask in plain words. Had William supported the removal of Archie's princely styling from palace protocol? Princely styling, in simple terms, meant the formal way Archie's place was recognized inside royal records and ceremonial planning. Palace protocol meant the private household rules that shaped who appeared in official documents, services, and family arrangements. Meghan needed the answer, because silence had become its own kind of verdict. William needed control, because every exception, in his mind, could weaken the future he was trying to build. William chose his words carefully, and that care made the room colder. The prince said the future of the monarchy could not be shaped by personal emotion, even when emotion was painful. Meghan stared at him as though he had just confirmed her worst fear. To her, he was hiding behind duty, because duty sounded cleaner than admitting human damage. William felt the accusation land hard, but he did not move. He believed Meghan was turning a constitutional boundary into a personal attack, and the future king refused to let anger rewrite the rules. Meghan's voice sharpened. She told William that he had protected the crown more fiercely than he had protected his nephew's dignity. The crown, in plain language, meant the monarchy itself, the power, rules, history, and image wrapped around the royal family. That word mattered because William saw it as survival, while Meghan saw it as the shield used to keep Archie at a distance. Her words hit him like a strike. His face tightened, but his silence returned, and that silence made Meghan step closer emotionally, even if neither of them moved. Charles heard Archie's name through the door, and something in him broke. The king entered midway through the exchange, not as a calm monarch, but as a father who suddenly understood how far the wound had spread. Meghan turned toward him with tears trapped behind her fury. William looked at him with the guarded expression of a man who knew the line had already been crossed. Charles listened for only a moment before slamming his hand onto the table. The room went silent. Meghan stopped. William froze. Charles stood there breathing heavily, no longer able to hide behind the throne. Everyone understood the truth at once. The king had not reacted only as monarch. He had reacted as a wounded father. Yet Charles's outburst did not end the crisis. It exposed the hidden power struggle beneath it. After Charles raised his voice, the palace shifted from family pain to institutional survival. Doors closed, aides moved faster, phones were taken into private rooms. The question was no longer whether Meghan had gone too far or William had been too cold. The question was who truly controlled the future, the monarch on the throne or the heir preparing to inherit it. Charles sat alone with the advisory notes, and the anger drained from his face. An advisory chain, in simple words, meant the quiet line of senior aides and officials who reviewed a sensitive decision before it reached the king. Household protocol meant the private rules that guided family appearances, names, and roles. Succession planning meant the careful preparation for the monarchy's future after Charles. And public role classification meant deciding who counted as active royal representatives and who did not. The king understood why those terms mattered, because each one made the decision look calm, official, and necessary. But none of them carried Archie's hurt. William's influence ran through the file like a shadow. The prince had not written every line, but his future shaped the whole argument. A smaller monarchy meant fewer public roles, fewer symbolic titles, and fewer unclear positions for relatives living outside royal duty. William believed that without clean limits, the next reign would inherit confusion. Yet the success of that plan carried suffering inside it. Every tighter boundary made the crown look stronger, while one child's name appeared to grow smaller on the page. Charles turned another sheet and stopped. The decision carried his approval, even if William had shaped the pressure behind it. The king had allowed the machine to move, and now the machine had left Meghan wounded, Harry angry, and Archie at the center of a storm he could not understand. Charles pressed his fingers against the paper, as if touching the words might soften them. It did not. The monarch looked shaken because the file proved the truth he feared most. He had not been pulled into the crisis. He had signed the road that led there. Camilla watched him withdraw, and she understood the silence better than anyone. The queen consort had seen Charles retreat into duty before, but this felt different. He was not only protecting the palace, he was hiding from the pain inside his own family. Camilla did not speak at first, because she knew one wrong sentence could sound like judgment. Then she quietly told him that Meghan's anger would not disappear simply because the household called the matter settled. A private secretary entered with the final warning. He told Charles that reversing the decision after Meghan's confrontation would make the palace look weak, as if the crown had bowed to pressure. The king listened, and William later insisted Archie's personal dignity could still be protected. Without restoring ceremonial royal styling, Charles heard both arguments. He heard the political logic. He heard the family damage. Then he chose silence. And when Charles chose silence, the fallout began immediately. The next morning felt colder than the night before. No statement came, no correction appeared, no reassurance was sent across the family divide. Meghan waited for a call that did not arrive, while William entered a briefing with his jaw set and his eyes unreadable. Charles, meanwhile, sat behind a desk where the crown seemed heavier than ever. Meghan read the message twice, then placed the phone face down. The palace had decided not to reverse Archie's strict protocol styling, meaning his princely recognition would stay removed from the private rules used for future royal planning. A controlled internal response meant the household would quietly guide staff on what to say, what not to say, and how to prevent the crisis from spreading. That mattered because silence was no longer neutral. It now sounded like a verdict. Meghan had expected anger from the palace. She had not expected emptiness. William entered the morning briefing without asking who had spoken to Meghan. The prince already knew the answer. No one had truly spoken to her. They had passed the decision through indirect channels, the safest palace method and the cruelest family method. He listened as aides explained that the matter was considered settled, but the words did not give him peace. William believed delay would create a larger crisis later, yet even he privately admitted the timing had been painful. The future king had won control, but the room did not feel like victory. Charles sat behind the desk and stared at the telephone before Harry's call came through. The king answered with caution, and Harry did not waste time. His voice carried hurt, anger, and the exhaustion of a father who believed his son had been pushed aside. Charles refused to condemn William, and the refusal changed the tone instantly. Harry pressed him harder. The monarch softened his voice, but soft words could not hide a hard decision. Charles wanted to protect both sons, yet the conversation proved he could not do it without wounding one of them. Aides moved quietly through future ceremonial drafts, removing Archie's name where the old styling still appeared. A ceremonial draft, in simple terms, was an early written plan for services, family appearances, and formal royal moments before they became final. Each deletion made the decision more real. Each correction closed another door. Meghan did not see those papers, but she felt their effect. William knew they existed, and that knowledge sat heavily on him because paperwork had now become proof of separation. Charles finally pushed the file away and asked for Meghan. Not with Harry. Not with William. Not with any aide standing near the wall to soften the truth. The king wanted one private meeting, one room where the crown could not speak first. For the first time since the confrontation, the crown stepped aside, and only family remained. When Meghan entered the private room, there were no folders on the table. No aides stood by the wall. No royal language waited to soften the blow. Charles looked older than he had the night before. Meghan looked exhausted, but unbroken. For once, the argument was not about monarchy, protocol, or public image. It was about a grandfather hearing what the decision had done to a mother. Charles waited until the door closed before he spoke, and even then his voice carried strain. The title decision, in plain words, was the palace's choice to keep Archie's princely recognition out of active family planning, even though the child remained part of the royal bloodline. That mattered because it touched two painful truths at once. Meghan feared Archie would grow up feeling less valued than his cousins. Charles feared any reversal would shake the future structure William was trying to protect. Meghan did not attack him at first. She spoke with the tired force of someone who had already spent too many nights defending a child who could not defend himself. She told Charles that one day Archie might ask why his family made him feel smaller, why his name could be loved in private but removed in formal spaces. The king lowered his eyes. He had faced parliaments, crowds, critics, and scandals, but this question carried a different kind of weight. It did not accuse the crown. It accused the grandfather inside him. Charles admitted he had failed to explain the decision with humanity. The king did not call it simple. He did not hide behind tradition. Protocol, he told Meghan, meant the rules that guided titles, ceremonies, and official recognition inside the royal household. But rules without care could become cruel. Meghan listened, and for the first time since the confrontation, her anger softened into grief. She said she had not wanted a war. She had wanted Archie's place respected before the world turned his name into another palace battle. Charles then gave the answer Meghan feared. He could not reverse the protocol without destabilizing the future monarchy William was preparing to lead. The future monarchy meant the smaller, stricter royal system the prince believed would survive public pressure and protect the throne after Charles. Meghan heard the finality in his voice. The king heard the pain in her silence. Both understood that compassion had arrived too late to change the decision. Charles offered only one promise. Archie would not be erased from royal history, even if his ceremonial role remained changed. He said this as a private family assurance, not a public announcement, because the palace would not make the wound part of a statement. Meghan stood slowly, carrying no victory, only the knowledge that Charles now carried the emotional cost himself. And once the private pain reached the outside world, the palace could no longer control the story. By dawn, the private wound had become a national spectacle. Britain woke to headlines that turned a family argument into a constitutional drama. Some saw Meghan as a mother defending her child. Others saw William as the guardian of a disciplined monarchy. But one image captured everything. People gathering outside Buckingham Palace, staring at the gates, as if the family inside had finally broken beyond repair. Charles watched the morning coverage without speaking. Palace communications, in simple words, meant the team responsible for shaping official messages, calming public storms, and deciding what the royal household would say to the world. That team prepared one careful line, refusing to discuss private family matters or title protocol. Title protocol meant the rules used to decide how royal names and styles appeared in formal planning. The statement sounded controlled, but control no longer felt powerful. It felt frightened. William saw the headline before an aide could turn the paper away. Archie title road tears royals apart. The words hit the prince harder than any private accusation because now the monarchy's future had a child's face attached to it. He had believed the stricter royal vision would protect the crown from confusion. Now the future king saw that discipline could look like distance, and distance could look like cruelty. William did not regret wanting order, but he could no longer pretend the public would only see structure. Meghan heard the coverage described over the phone, and her silence carried more force than anger. She knew people would argue over her tone, her timing, and her place inside the royal story. But Archie's name had reached the nation, and that changed everything. A private wound had become public evidence of a deeper divide. Meghan had feared her son would be reduced quietly. Now the world was speaking his name, not as a footnote, but as the center of a family reckoning. A broadcaster framed the story as the first true test of William's future crown against Harry and Meghan's family legacy. The phrase spread quickly because it made the crisis easy to understand and impossible to soften. This was not only about one child's styling, it was about whether the monarchy could become smaller without becoming colder. It was about whether family love could survive when every name, role, and place had to pass through the machinery of survival. A small crowd gathered near Buckingham Palace, and one woman held a handwritten sign that read, "Children should never pay for royal battles." Charles saw the image later and looked away before anyone spoke. The king understood then that no palace line could contain the damage. The public spectacle had forced his private grief into the open. But the final judgment would not come from newspapers, crowds, or palace statements. It would come from Charles himself. In the end, Charles did not undo the decision. He did something more painful. He accepted responsibility for it. The title remained stripped from palace protocol. William's vision of a tighter monarchy survived, and Meghan left with the wound still visible. But the king finally understood what the crown had cost him. Not politically, not historically, personally. Charles confirmed the decision in private, and the words seemed to age him as he spoke them. Archie's stripped protocol styling, in simple terms, meant his princely recognition would remain absent from the palace's active rules for ceremonies, documents, and future family planning. That mattered because this was no longer only about one child's name. It was about the shape of the monarchy William would inherit, and whether that future could stay firm without becoming cold. Charles knew consistency would protect the institution, but he also knew consistency had wounded his family. William listened as the king delivered the final line. The prince's authority had been strengthened, but no victory entered his face. He had defended a smaller monarchy, one with fewer blurred roles and fewer symbolic promises that could later become public battles. Yet the future king now understood that every clean rule left a human mark behind it. Charles looked at him and said duty without tenderness could preserve the crown while damaging the family beneath it. William did not argue. For once, silence did not sound like control. It sounded like regret. Meghan accepted that the palace would not move, but she refused to let Archie's worth be measured by a title. Her anger had burned hot, then broken into grief, and now it settled into something stronger. She would not beg the institution to recognize what she already knew as a mother. Archie did not need a ceremonial place to be loved. He did not need palace wording to be whole. Still, Meghan understood the loss. because a family's rejection can hurt, even when a mother refuses to let it define her child. William finally admitted in a recorded private conversation with Charles that the decision should have been handled with compassion, not silence. The prince did not reverse himself, but he recognized the failure in the way the palace had moved. Charles heard that admission and later wrote a private note for Archie's future, making clear that the child was never unwanted, even if the institution had drawn its line. The king placed the note away quietly, as if it carried the apology he could not make publicly. This moment proved that the modern monarchy could survive by becoming smaller and stricter, but only at a deep emotional price. Meghan lost the battle over protocol. William secured the future he believed in. Charles carried the hardest truth of all. A crown can protect an institution, but it cannot heal every family wound. This was the night the monarchy chose control over comfort, and every person involved walked away changed forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.